I love that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good one. Good for grounding. I'm recording already.
Perfect. We entered the time portal, baby, where time is
Yeah.
illusory, it doesn't exist.
Welcome to Openly Spoken, the podcast to help you show up, speak out, and be seen. Here you'll get to eavesdrop on connected women's conversations about self-love, confidence, healing, relationships, creativity, and more. I'm your host, Celia Antonio, and I am your guide to getting you grounded into your body, feeling your full spectrum of emotion, and expanding your fullest self-expression. I also pop in here from time to time with solo episodes where I give you tips, tricks, and resources like meditations, visualizations, and all the things to get you grounded, to get you to feel, to get you to alchemize, and to get you to expand and express yourself fully. I'm so grateful that you're here, and I invite you to now put your hands on your heart, take a deep breath, set a tone for how you want to be as you show up for this podcast, take what resonates in this podcast, leave out what doesn't resonate, and take some time to reflect and to contemplate. And if there's anything in the podcast you want to chat about, you can always reach out to me on Instagram at selfexpressbabe. Thank you so much for being here. Now let's get started.
And that was because I allowed space. So I really want to encourage allowing your space to be, to not do.
Yeah, I love that, because that's so in our modern society, that's such a big piece that so many people are uncomfortable with.
Yeah.
You know, like making that space to just sit and be. It's like, oh, I got to do something. I got to be productive.
Well, and when you stop, and when you stop doing, you may even become aware that you've been busy to avoid things that you weren't ready to deal with.
Yeah.
But because you stopped, you've given it space. And it is safe. It is safe to deal with those things. And those things are calling to you. You just couldn't hear them because you're so busy doing.
Yeah. Hello, welcome to another episode of Openly Spoken, the podcast to help you show up, speak out, and be seen. Today's guest is Carrie Baquie, and I'm so excited to finally be sharing this because we chatted last year in November of 2022. So I'm excited that this episode is finally going to see the light of day today. And let me first introduce you to Carrie. So Carrie Baquie is a chronic illness coach. She's also a spunky mom of 3 teens, and she is a survivor of simultaneously a brain injury, Lyme disease, and a mold illness. And she transformed all of that chaos and overwhelm from these 3 major things that she was dealing with into thriving. And she did that through an unstoppable mindset and a soul-centered strategy. So because she overcame this major medical crisis, she pivoted from her 20-year career as a project manager to becoming a chronic illness coach. Can't talk today. And Carrie uses the lessons that she learned through her recovery journey to empower those with long-term health challenges to get unstuck and reclaim the life that they love. And you're going to hear the story of that. We actually started this conversation with talking about how a major health crisis can crystallize your soul purpose and transform your life. So you're going to hear Carrie's firsthand experience on how she did that for herself. But really, I would say that the summary of this episode is how you can show up and be of service from a place of wholeness. And there are a lot of little gems here for that topic. So yeah, I highly recommend maybe listening with a little journal next to you, or maybe you just sit back and relax and let everything kind of be received. So just a little bit more about Carrie. She is a holistic coach. So she's a chronic illness coach and she works holistically. So what this means is that she partners with her clients to build wellness at the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual levels, which I love. Carrie also works together with clients to help build support from loved ones, shift their mindset, advocate for their needs, realign with their values, and implement medical recommendations. I think this is also like such important work to be doing, especially like I'm speaking from like my limited point of view living in America, and I know that Carrie lives in America too, is that people who have chronic illnesses aren't really advocated for and aren't really like seen mostly as like, I was going to say valued, but like we don't know when people have chronic illnesses all the time, and it's like not something that we like to talk about because we just share, you know, highlight reels. We're not going to go around telling people like what we have. And yeah, it just feels like so important to have this part of being human essentially be supported. So I really love how Carrie is doing this with her work and how it's such a personal way that she ended up landing on doing this. And yeah, I'm very excited for you to hear this episode and this conversation where you are going to just hear so many little nuggets about being of service from a place of wholeness. You're going to hear about how a major health crisis can help you see what you're actually meant to do here, and how something that can be so chaotic and so painful and terrifying and yeah, just like crazy, how that can really transform to end up being something where you look back and you're like, wow, I'm grateful that that happened because I saw something new. I saw my potential. I saw where I meant to go. So without further ado, let's get into today's episode with Carrie Baquie. So I usually like to start and ask with like, what's alive in you right now in regards to our topic. So we're going to be talking about how a major health crisis can help you figure out your soul's purpose and like completely transform your life in a good way. So what's alive for you today with that?
It's so interesting because part of what's alive for me is as I step more into my soul purpose, as I try to become who I'm meant to be, I am coming face to face with letting go of who I've always been, if that makes sense. So who I've always been as a human, for years and years and years, I've had these constructs and these perspectives and this way of seeing the world. And they served me for a period of time. And I'm coming up against that. To be this new person, I have to let go of those old ways.
Yeah, that's difficult to do. I'm kind of going through something like that with my diet. I was a vegetarian and a vegan for a long time. And I'm like, with Thanksgiving coming up, I'm like, I want to eat turkey.
Go gentle.
Yeah. And I've been like, for the last couple of months, been like sitting with that and like grieving and like just, you know, asking myself, like, am I really sure? And my body's asking for it. And yeah, it's hard to like, when you have strong beliefs about something, when you start to question that and that like shatters, like your whole identity is like pulled out from under you like a rug.
Yeah, and I think there's so many different ways that happens, right? Because in this instance, your body's telling you what it needs, what it wants after years of being aligned in a different way, and now you're paying attention to a different need, right? Whereas I have a need that's come out of being sick and needing to step into my soul purpose. So there's different ways that it comes at us, but there's still the loss and the grief and the upheaval that happens as you try to change.
So what is your soul purpose?
My soul purpose, I sigh heavy, and I don't know why the heck I sighed heavy, because it's so exciting. It's so big and it's so powerful, and it's informed by my illness, and that purpose is to empower women, really get deep into holding women's hands so that they can own their power, own their voice, and take control of what's theirs and let go of the rest, so that they can get the healing at the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual levels that seem so elusive.
Mm-hmm. I
So
love that.
it's particularly women, they're disproportionately impacted by long-term health challenges. There's so many different things that we hold and we carry. And it's not to say I don't want to help men, because I'm happy to help men, but I have a passion for serving women and serving their unique experience of illness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel the same as you.
Yeah.
And I've recently been diving into research about the female body, specifically breasts, because I have a breast massage course that I launched about a
Okay.
month ago. And
Wow.
yeah, it's been really fun. And yeah, disproportionately, like men can get breast cancer as well, but it disproportionately affects women more. And it's like the number 2 cancer-related death in
Oh my gosh.
developed nations. And that's followed by it's not followed, like the number 1 cancer-related death right before it is lung cancer. So it's kind of in the same area of the body,
Right.
which I found very
Well,
interesting.
and you know, on a spiritual plane, on an
Mm-hmm.
energetic plane, I'm curious as you say that, what comes up with the energetics around the heart and how we're living.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like as women, we like don't always get the space to speak our truth and, you know, stand up for ourselves in the workplace, ask for the raise, or, you know, let our true expression out. Because there's, you know, sometimes there's people will call you a bitch, or like there's, you know, there's things
Yeah.
sometimes that come up with that. So then we hold it in. And when we're holding that in, I think that that's all carried in the heart space, because if you can think of someone who's confident, their heart is open.
Yeah.
And when you're not speaking your truth, like it dwindles your confidence, and then you start to have this type of a posture. So
And that caving in, that that dwindling, that there's a loss in it there, and
yeah.
there's a sadness that so many of us can have when we have lost touch with our voice, with our power. And I call
Yeah.
that that a lot of what you're talking about, I refer to as the divine feminine. That energy, that softer, like it's softer, but it's still powerful. It's gentle, and it is effective and flowing and easy versus the rigid and the structured. You know, I'm not saying this in a throw out the divine masculine. I'm just saying that what we so often are missing is that balance, that integration of the divine feminine with the divine masculine. And so much, you know, you're talking about the repercussions of speaking up for ourselves, that we've been taught. So much of it's been taught to us, of how we, good girls in school, keep our heads down, do the work, get the good grades. We've been trained that that's how to best operate in this world. And
Yeah.
so I think what you and I are doing is I believe part of our passion is to help that expansion, that opening up, the heart-centered way of living and breathing and expressing.
Yeah. And that makes me so excited to be able to be doing that. Something I've noticed that it's come up already twice, maybe 3 times, is this piece around grief. And I'm so curious with your journey of you realizing that you had an illness, and like having that lead to you realizing a new purpose for yourself and a new identity for yourself. How was grief a part in that? And how did it help you?
There's so many layers of grief that come with illness. You know,
Mm.
I was facing what I thought was the end.
Mm.
And there was the grief at the trauma I was causing my kids. There was the grief at the loss of functionality, the loss of who I thought I was and who I thought I'd be. But specific to your question and soul purpose. There was grief and maybe better stated regret around what I had not yet stepped into. I had utter clarity, just crystal clear clarity that I had not lived up to what I was meant to do as a soul. I had not used my gifts in the way they were intended. Now, it's not to discount how I'd shown up previously, but I had, Tara Moore uses the word play big, the phrase play big. And so I had not been playing big, I'd been playing small. And I knew I was meant to serve others in a way that was too indirect from the way I had been doing it. And so another aspect of the grief that informed that is I had this procedure, and during the procedure, I was terrified. I was all alone. My husband had been kicked out of the patient office because he was afraid of needles, and they were using a really big needle. And so he was down the hall. I was alone. It was cold. The practitioner was indifferent and cold as well. And I had this God moment as I'm terrified, and I look up and there's a small window above my head, and there's light coming in, and there's this sudden expansion of awareness, and I felt all the sadness and all the loneliness and all the fear of all the people who were in similar situations, who had been, who are, and who would be in those situations, who didn't have someone waiting in the next room over. And I mean, it was this, I was one with that feeling. And it was a feeling that if I can get through this, I will do something to serve and heal this. And that was a level of grief, of other people's grief, that informed my purpose, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. I got chills up and down my arms and up and down my back when you mentioned that you were feeling the grief of all these other people that didn't have someone waiting for them.
Yeah.
Oh, how beautiful.
It was beautiful, and it was tears flowing, like it was this wave, this unity consciousness that I just feel like was such a gift.
So I'm curious if before this time, were there any like practices that you were doing, like meditation or anything that would help you be present? Or was this like the first time in your life that you had this big moment of awareness?
I've been a spiritual explorer for years and years and years. So there was a part of me that was tapped into the possibility, right? And that opened me up for what unfolded. It's interesting when you talk about grief and you talk about presence. I feel that that's really one of the keys to managing grief. Is so much of grief is about holding on to the past or mourning the future, and to move through it, you have to be present in the now, because now is where you have control. Now is where possibility is, and that allows you to heal and move through the grief.
So then, with your focus on the now, what were some of the first things you did to like move through, maybe like after your treatment? Or I'm sure that this realization was a big kind of like motivation for you to, really like be like, I'm going to make it through this because I'm meant to help people.
Yeah, I have to say that I was sick for a while. I was sick for 3.5, 4 years.
Wow.
So there was a period of time where I had to hold the grief. I had to hold this drive to serve. The two major drivers in my recovery were my children, my family, and wanting to be there for them and wanting to have the least traumatic impact on their lives as I moved through the illness. The other driver was this purpose, this need to serve. And I held that, but that's not the action I took. The action was around the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual healing so that I could get to that place of serving. I have this theory around the chronic illness life cycle, and there's 7 phases. And a mistake that people with chronic illness often make is one I had some tendencies toward as well. One of the earlier phases are initial crisis, where you're kind of drowning, can't breathe, feet aren't on the ground, you're just trying to figure out which ends up. The next phase is actually loss and grief. Then you move into acceptance and release, and there's so much emotional weight here. There's so much mental weight. And people in these earlier phases are often trying to go straight to serve. If they have any kind of, it's almost like a defense mechanism. If I can help other people, maybe I'll get better, or maybe I can deny what's actually happening. And that actually makes it worse.
You froze for a second.
Oh, did I?
You said that discord, I think.
The discordance between where they actually are in the life cycle and how they're behaving actually gets in the way of the recovery. Because you have to go through the steps. After acceptance and release is the physical transformation. After the physical transformation is the integration. And then, and then you get to serving. So it's really interesting to me because I experienced some of that, and I've seen that time and time again with clients and friends who are also sick.
I love that you have those different steps. I think that's very helpful for anyone listening who might have someone in their family or might be going through something themselves. I think it's also a very good reminder that we need to fill our own cups before we can give to other people. You know, even though wanting to serve other people is coming from a good place, if we're not ourselves filled with our own love, then that affects our ability to even serve. And like, we don't get to serve at a powerful, at that powerful level that we're capable of.
You know, and there's another side of that coin. Part of it is about serving from a full cup, and part of it is serving from the scar, not the wound. I don't know who originally said that, but it's you want to serve from a place where you're already through the healing, not in the rawness of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Because you're like this warrior that went through this like battle, and you have that, you know, that physical and emotional and spiritual and mental strength from going through that experience. And that gives you, that kind of gives you like qualifications, for lack of a better term, to help others.
Yeah. It's the hero's journey, right?
Yeah, exactly. So is there anything specific that, before preparing for this call, with our topic of like how you can find your life's purpose and like a new identity through going through an illness, that you feel called to share for anyone that's here?
Yeah. So, you know, the first thing is my awareness of having a higher calling, a greater purpose, came from this crisis. It came from this medical crisis. I don't think that's a requirement. It may be another form of crisis. It may be another form of challenge, but it doesn't have to be that situation. It can be a situation where you just really get in touch in that divine feminine way, with the unsilence, the irritation, or the something's not quite right, and creating space to sit with that and to connect with what is my purpose. How do I really want to be showing up? And what does that look like on I keep on saying these four tenets: the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual levels. What are my core values is one of the key questions to be asking. What are my core values, and am I living aligned with those core values? So for me, I had the clarity that I hadn't served yet in the way that I was meant to serve. As I healed and recovered, it wasn't just, okay, well, now I'm going to go into the doctor's office and hold people's hands, right? It's like, how am I actually going to show up? And I didn't have total clarity I gave myself that space that I was just talking about. And I asked the question, where does my skills and experience intersect with my passion? And that's how I came to this clarity around being a chronic illness coach.
That's such a powerful question.
Yeah. And actually, I want to give credit, I think, between Amy Porterfield and Jasmine Starr, that's how I came to those questions. I was listening to them a lot at that point, and I think one of them I was listening to as like I had a moment. And I got to tell you, when I asked that question and I sat with it, and I allowed spirit to flow through me. I allowed the answers to come. I didn't force them. I got to tell you, it was so beautiful, because it was another one of these moments. I was driving about 45 minutes, and I had this like clicking of like, oh, this is the answer. And I couldn't write it down, and I just had to drive. Well, I went 24 hours, maybe even 36 hours without writing it down. And my body was like mad at me. It was like, girlfriend, you've got to get this out. You've got to write this down. And I finally got home after, I think it was about 36 hours. And then in less than like an hour, I had the entire framework for my business coaching.
Wow.
For my chronic illness coaching. I had the framework for the chronic illness life cycle, and like just all the pieces. And it was just this divine download. I know it was coming through me. And I just felt really grateful for that. And that was because I allowed space. So I really want to encourage allowing your space to be, to not do.
Yeah. I love that, because that's so in our modern society, that's such a big piece that so many people are uncomfortable with.
Yeah.
Like making that space to just sit and be, it's like, oh, I got to do something. I got to be productive.
Well, and when you stop, and when you stop doing, you may even become aware that you've been busy to avoid things that you weren't ready to deal with.
Yeah.
But because you stopped, you've given it space. And it is safe. It is safe to deal with those things. And those things are calling to you. You just couldn't hear them because you're so busy doing.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Also, what you just shared about, like, you had the idea and you went, I think you said more than 24 hours without writing it down, and that your body was like, oh, I gotta get this out. That makes me think of, have you read Big Magic by Elizabeth?
I have.
It reminds me of her
Gilbert, right?
Yeah, Gilbert, Elizabeth Gilbert. That reminds me of what she says in there, how like ideas and inspiration, they're like little entities, and like they come to visit you, and if you don't write them down, they're gonna go off and go visit someone else.
Yeah. This one, it was spirit knocking. This one was like, dude, you've got to take care of me right now. I got to get this out. So
yeah. I love that. So I have a set of questions I like to ask all of my guests towards the end.
Okay.
And I'm feeling called to ask them now because I feel like they can go into like another piece of conversation.
Okay.
Okay. So the first one is, what does self-love mean to you?
Oh my gosh. This is a developing understanding. And what I'm getting a clearer understanding is that self-love is the mother goddess wrapping her wings of light, her arms of light around you, and holding you and breathing with you with love and light, and using that as a model for what would you do, what would the mother goddess do to care for you as though she were your child. For me, that's my guidance on what do I need to do to take care of myself. What would the mother goddess do?
Mm-hmm. That's so beautiful. I love that. Especially because that gives you, no matter what you're going through, that kind of gives you the power to be your own parent, with that question of like, what would Mother Goddess give me? How would she support me right now?
Yeah, and I think it's important because not all of us had the parents we wanted or needed, right? And so there's the model of the inner child and the inner child work and taking care of the inner child. Well, the language around that is how would you parent that child?
Yeah,
And for
exactly.
those who don't have the model of good parenting, Mother Goddess serves as a universal understanding that we all deserve. Just by being born, by being who we are, we deserve, and I actually believe that we are love and light, and Mother Goddess helps us connect with that.
So beautiful. So the next question is, what makes you feel the most grounded?
My feet in the sand.
In
the
Good
sand,
one.
hot sand, sun shining down. And very related is being in the ocean. The ocean is my heart song. And so those are two things that are outside of my house, that are outside of most spaces that I am in on a daily basis. So I want to add the third, which is breath. It's getting still and planting my feet and breathing in the light that I know is there, that is coming up through my feet, is coming down through above, and creating that pillar of light through me. That's how I create the groundedness.
I love that. I need to go to the beach today.
Are you near the beach?
Yeah, it's a 30-minute walk and I barely go.
Oh my gosh.
For living right next to it, I barely go.
Oh my gosh, that is a travesty. It's a sin.
I know.
Well, if you go today, please take off your shoes and wiggle your toes in the sand for me.
Yeah, I will. So the third question, I'm not
It's a little cold here.
It's cold. Yeah, it's a tiny bit cold here, but it's nothing compared to most parts of America right now. So the second question I'm forgetting, but I'll ask you my favorite question.
Yeah.
What is your favorite part about being a woman?
We were talking about the divine feminine, and I think women have easier access to that divine feminine. I was talking about how we're disconnected from it, but I think our ability to reconnect and to tap into that is easier. And when we connect into the divine feminine as women, it it sounds super cheesy, but we connect in with our power and our glory and all that we can do to support and love and be who we are, shine, right? To shine. I think
Yeah.
that's the key for all of us for shining
Yeah.
is as women is tapping into that divine feminine.
Yeah. And I think I know both of us don't serve men with our work, but I've realized lately that like men need this connection with divine feminine as well, because a big piece of feminine energy is like being able to emote and being able to cry. And like we have these
Yeah.
messages in the world that are like, boys don't cry. And we have, you know, oppression for them. And,
Yeah.
you know, as women, we get that space to cry to our friends without our friend being like, oh, whoa, like, you know, men don't normally have that same space in our society. And I think that's slowly shifting as women are able to connect more with the divine feminine, because we're becoming more powerful to be able to hold space. And I think I feel like I'm like all the words are like coming to me as I speak. I
I
think
love
that
it.
as more women start to really ground and embody this divine feminine, that men will start to feel safe to connect with their feminine side. And I think that will lead to a whole new layer of like collective awakening and a pivot in how society is.
Yeah, I think you speak to what I was nuancing with my words when I said women have it easier.
Yeah.
It's easier path for us to tap into the divine feminine because of the cultural structures for all of us, but particularly for men that keep them from feeling safe in tapping into that. What's
Yeah.
interesting is I think our younger generations, with all that they're doing, with uh, all this diversity and equality and LGBTQI and all of that, it is allowing for more of a blending of the divine feminine and masculine, even if they don't have those words for it. I see that's part of what's happening. And so that shift you're talking about isn't just happening
Yeah.
at our generation's level, but it's coming up more powerfully in the younger generations. And I just think that's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah. I didn't even realize that.
Yeah. I've
Like,
got some teens. They keep me on the forefront.
yeah. Oh, wow. That's beautiful. I love that for the world. Gives me a little bit of hope for the
Good,
future.
good. Yes.
It's wild how like quickly things can change, you know, like 20 years ago, the iPhone didn't exist. Social media didn't exist. Like things can really change. And yeah.
Yes, and we were
Yes.
talking
And
at the beginning. Yeah, because yes, and right. Yes, time moves fast and things move fast. The shift towards more divine feminine has been happening over the centuries. You know, it was taken. There was this, you know, centuries ago, when there's this shift from women-centered cultures and women-centered medicine and all of that. Since those days, we've been trying to come back to
yeah.
resist, right? And so it's been small inroads, and it's like those inroads are building on each other and getting stronger with and kind of exponentially. And so yes, things
Yeah.
change really quickly, and other things need to build on them, and we got to keep building on them, and we keep opening ourselves up to them.
Yeah.
so that they can become what they're meant to be, so that we can become what we're meant to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so true. What comes to mind for me when you share that is like what's happening in Iran, because like women there have protested before, and there have been protests there before, and it wasn't as powerful as what's happening now, because the young people now like had mothers who were already, wanting a change, and they
Yes.
grew up already hearing those stories of like, we need to be more compassionate, we need to be more equal, we need to, not put so much authority and structure on like a cloth that we have to wear on our head in public. And yeah, I love that reflection of that, like it has built upon each other.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's very like with being people of service. And I'm sure everyone listening to this podcast as well is like someone who is here to serve others. I feel like when we have such big dreams to like really change the world, it can be very helpful to realize like things build over time. So even if you're working hard at like, let's say climate change is your purpose, it might feel like, your work is so small and so insignificant, but it's going to like the next people, the next generation will stand on your shoulders, and it just keeps
Yes.
building and building and building.
You really well clearly articulated that better than I did. I love that the image of standing on shoulders, and it's like hand to foot, where those feet on the shoulders are being supported by the hands below them to keep them stable and keep them rising up.
Yeah. I love that. Do you ever do any like ancestor healing work? Because that makes me think of that.
It has been the kind of thing that has been nudged and niggled to me that I need to do some of that.
Me too. I've done a little bit, but it like keeps popping up.
It keeps on going, hey, need to do this. There's so much work to be done. There's so much healing to be done. It's like one nugget at a time.
Yeah. I love that.
And honestly, I'm not saying this to toot my own horn, but I want to genuinely reflect that it doesn't always show up in the way of the ancestors. If we look at ancestors as these people 100 years before us, I did work in my 20s to break the cycle of my families, the cycles of codependencies, the cycle of addiction. And so that was ancestral healing.
Yeah, it was.
And that was what I did. I broke that before I had children, so I didn't pass that on.
Yeah.
And so I didn't call it ancestral healing, but I'm thinking now that that was a form of it.
Yeah, it totally was. Yeah. That's what's interesting about like how we label things. Like, for example, the first time someone asked me about shadow work, I'm like, well, what is that? And when I learned what it was, I'm like, oh, I've been doing that. And even like words like embodiment, like when I learned about embodiment, I'm like, oh, I've done this before, but the practitioner or guide didn't say it was embodiment work. They called it a dynamic meditation.
Right.
So yeah, it's interesting how our like words for things change over time, and like when certain practices are very popularized and you're like, oh, I need to do that, but like without realizing that you've already done that before.
Yeah. I think what's important about what you and I both just shared around that is we need to be careful of our labels and acknowledge the work that we have done. Just because we haven't met the criteria of the label doesn't mean our work isn't worthy and that the progress that we're making is not enough. So many women act out of a place of not enoughness. And if we can just really take the time to celebrate and acknowledge what we are doing, what progress we have made, I think that's something really powerful for all of us.
Yeah, so true. I love too how you did all this work of like breaking patterns before having kids. I feel like that really like sets the next generation ahead.
Yeah.
And I myself have been doing healing work for like 10 years, and my husband and I are now talking about like having kids within the next like 2 years.
Okay.
And we talk about all the time about how, because both of us have parents who had us really young, and
Okay.
we talk about how interesting it is that when you're so young, you're a little bit more connected with ego and like more focused on yourself and stuff. But as you get older and you learn more about the world, and you maybe, not everyone does this, maybe you get access to certain books or certain speakers or mentors or someone else reflecting back at you what's actually true, and you have that moment like we talked about earlier where like all of your beliefs get shattered and your
Yeah.
identity like shatters, and you step into this new way of being. And it's just amazing how when people have that possibility to do that, like what that does for the next generation. Because in my opinion, and I'm not here to like judge any parent who had kids at a young age, that's your journey. I think everything that happens is because it's your journey and that's what you were meant to do. But I really believe that like as a parent, you are a guide. You're a space holder. You're essentially someone of service. And like we said before, it's hard to be of service and to give love to others without filling your own cup first, because then that potential that you really have to be a powerful space holder and guide and healer and be a mirror, you're just not able to fill that potential. And for anyone listening, like even myself, who can realize that, that gives you like this ability to have so much compassion for your parents.
Yeah.
So you just realize they really did do the best that they could. They did the best that they could at the time.
Yeah, I say it's the best they could do with the tools available.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
You know, it's about the toolbox that you have, and if the tools aren't there,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's a lot harder.
Yeah.
And I think that aspect of compassion is super hard.
It's really hard because it
and
feels
super
like
important.
Yeah, it's super important. It frees you, and it's so hard to get to that point because it feels like you're saying that everything that happened is okay.
Yeah.
Which it is okay, but you know what I mean? Like condoning it versus accepting it is like two different things.
It's confusing, and that's part of the hard
Mm-hmm.
it's part of the navigation of it all, because
Mm-hmm.
man, there's so many emotions. If it was just one emotion, man, I got this, right? But there's so
Yeah.
many interactions of emotions that it gets really confusing, and it's like, well, I can't do that because then like, and especially if the parents haven't changed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
That's the
And they're
hardest
not
part.
and they don't see that they need to change. That
Yeah.
becomes really hard. But the healing isn't about healing them, it's about healing you. And the compassion, like the mother enfolding you with love and light, the compassion is self-care. It
Yeah.
is how you take care of yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, I love this conversation. For anyone that's still here listening, I would love to give some space for you to share about your work and share about where people can find you. And if there's any like links that you know you're going to be giving me for the show notes to where people can find you, or to any freebies or anything like that.
Okay. Yeah, I have a couple of things, if I can share them all.
Yeah.
Is that good?
Go ahead.
So you can always find me at carriebaquie.com. I do have a Women Transforming Chronic Illness Facebook group. So it's all about women coming together who are sick and tired of being sick and tired, and are ready to give and receive support towards transforming their experience of chronic illness. So I'd love to invite any woman in here dealing with long-term health challenges into that group. It is young and we are looking to bring more in and just create a really supportive community. So really excited about that. We have a flare-up recovery plan, which is a customizable recovery plan for when those flare-ups happen. Flare-ups are one of the hardest parts of being chronically ill or having long-term health challenges. The sudden resurgence of symptoms, and there's this whole upwelling of catastrophizing and, oh my God, I'll never be better. Oh my God, it's just going to get worse from here. And the flare-up recovery plan is meant to help you think ahead of time. What are the resources you need? What are the contact informations? What are the medicines? What will you do? So you can breathe deep and say, oh, I have this plan. This is what I'm going to do. I'm okay.
Mm-hmm.
So it's taking out the acute crisis of a flare-up, and giving you the calm and poise to get through it with grace.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my freebie.
Love it. So are you on any social media?
I am. I'm on Facebook, Carrie Baquie, and then Instagram and LinkedIn, Carrie Baquie.
Okay. So we'll put those.
I think LinkedIn, I'm Carrie Meffert Baquie. I'll give you all the links.
Okay, cool. Sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Carrie.
This has been so awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're so welcome.